Hello, my name is Robert Larson. I'm an attorney and I'm also the owner of the Larson Law Office in Mesa, Arizona, specializing in family law and estate planning. And today I'm recording a second video about spousal maintenance. And in my first video, I talked a little about the history of spousal maintenance in Arizona, what the purpose is, and kind of how it used to be in the past up until a couple of years ago. And some major changes took place a couple of years ago, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. So in the past, spousal maintenance was very unpredictable. The law in Arizona gave judges a number of factors, about a dozen different factors that they had to consider, but the law didn't really tell judges which factors were more important, and there was no specific calculation. So the same judge could see the same evidence and come up with very different outcomes. And so because of that, the state passed a law that the courts had to create a formula so that spousal maintenance could be more predictable. And that did take place, and it went into effect a little less than 2 years ago. So now we have a formula. So we've always had a child support formula in Arizona where you could just plug in the numbers if you knew them, and that would tell you what child support is. And now we have a formula for spousal maintenance. And a couple things to remember about that. First of all, once you do the formula and it gives you an outcome, it doesn't tell you exactly what spousal maintenance is supposed to be. It gives you a range. So in other words, it gives you kind of a high number and a low number and kind of what the middle is, like the average. And it doesn't tell the judge that he or she has to do any of those. It basically just gives a range of what would be an appropriate amount of spousal maintenance. And it also gives a range of what would be an appropriate duration. So in spousal maintenance, it's going to be a certain amount per month for a specified period of time. And so the guidelines that we have now, if you run the calculation, it will give you some presumptions of what it should be. And so a judge is given a range, and at that point, you can still argue that it should be either like on the high end or on the low end or just right in the middle. There's still a lot of room to argue a case, whether you're for spousal maintenance being awarded in a particular case or if you're against it. So there's still room to argue. It's not just an automatic specific number that the formula gives you. The second thing is you can also argue for exemptions or exceptions to the rule. So even when you do the formula, that doesn't mean the judge has to follow it at all when it comes to even within the range that the formula gives. You can argue that there are exceptions because of extenuating circumstances in your particular case. And so a lot of times that's where a lawyer can really help a lot in a case where spousal maintenance is a major issue. So even though there's a formula, there's still arguments to be made. And so far I've gone to some CLE, that's continuing education, and that's the thing I'm hearing from other lawyers is that there's still a lot of room to argue spousal maintenance cases. The formula helps get things a little bit more predictable, but it's not a final outcome. And so that's an important thing to remember. And I think another thing to remember is the committee that prepared this formula, they're collecting data from every case that where spousal maintenance is awarded. And they're trying to see how it's working in real life, and they're going to be probably tweaking the formula and changing it over time as they see what's happening. My personal opinion is I believe now it's a little bit easier to get spousal maintenance in Arizona than it used to be. I think a lot of judges before were very stingy when it came to spousal maintenance, and I think the formula is making it a little bit easier for the person who's seeking it. That's just a preliminary opinion. It could change over time as we get more data, but that's my initial opinion. So overall, in my opinion, I think the formula is a good thing. It creates a lot more predictability, and it also helps people be more realistic. I think a lot of times under the previous rules, there would be a party who was very unrealistic, and it could be on the side of the person who's seeking spousal maintenance. It could be on the side of the person who doesn't want to pay it. But a lot of times people were very unrealistic, and the formula gives us as attorneys something that we can say, look, I've run the formula and it says there's a presumption of this or that, whether there is spousal maintenance going to be awarded or whether there's not. That's another thing that could be argued. If you run the formula and it says that there's a presumption of no spousal maintenance, you can still argue that as well. So anyway, it does help make things more predictable but there's still a lot of room for argument, and there's still a lot of discretion for judges. But if you're going to ask for discretion from a judge, you're going to have to prove your case. You're going to have to show why there should be an exception to the rule. Otherwise, the judge is going to have a very easy time just going off of the formula that they use. So, one, run the formula. Two, see if you have any exceptions. If you are going to argue for exceptions, you need to prepare your case and make sure that you're able to prove it in court. Otherwise, the judge is probably not going to give it much consideration. And then a final thing is the judges are still required to follow the same law. Just because there's a formula now doesn't mean that the law changed. The same dozen or so factors that the judge had to consider before are still the same factors that they have to consider now. So there's a lot of arguments to be made. It's not just simply plug in the numbers and that's what it is, but it does give us more predictability. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to schedule an appointment with me. And if you'd like to get more of these videos, make sure you like and follow for more. Thanks.